This is a statue dedicated to the men of North Carolina who fought here at Gettysburg and played such a historic role in the charge on the third day. And this is the field that they were attempting to cross. Well, hello class, we're here at Gettysburg and we've been surveying the entire battlefield. And we're here on the location of the third battle, the epic and deciding conflict in this engagement. And what we were just discussing is the wisdom of Robert E. Lee ordering what has come to be known as Pickett's charge. It wasn't Pickett's decision, it wasn't his idea. As a matter of fact, General Longstreet had advised against this particular charge and really thought that Gettysburg was not a good location on which to fight. But Lee said, we invaded Pennsylvania to destroy the enemy, and if the enemy is here, then here is where we will fight. And so that decision to fight here in Gettysburg and to conduct this attack is what we're thinking about. Now, if you think about it kind of objectively, we know the outcome. And so it's easy for us to say it was a bad idea knowing how things turned out. But if this charge had been successful, then we would be calling Lee a hero and he would be a genius. Right? So we have the advantage of hindsight. Also, if you think about the first 2 days, on the first day when Lee's army arrived, they pushed the Union Army out of the town of Gettysburg. If that was the objective, they would have already captured the town. We drove through the town on the way getting here. So they pushed them out of the town, and so they've retreated, and they're more compact from the little round top on the right. See the hills over there is the Union line. To this position, about a mile away, is where the Union line is heavily entrenched in defensive positions. Right? The Confederates completely surround them, although they only have about 75,000 men. They're on all sides surrounding them. So he looks like Lee might say, well, we've pushed them back. We have them surrounded. If we make one more assault, we'll either capture them or destroy the army here. From the Union side, General Meade says, this is exactly where we want to be. Right? To have a compact, easily defended or strongly defended position. He has, as we'll see from the other side, what's called internal lines, meaning the roads on the other side are roads that he controls. So men and equipment and resources can come up through there, and you can move soldiers between your lines. If you think of it as a fishhook, between both sides of his flank, wherever you're being attacked, on day 2, little round top, you can move soldiers over there. Day 3, they could reallocate soldiers to strengthen this position. And so, if I were to compare it to a football game, if you are gaining yards on each play, you're getting closer and closer to the finish line, and now this might be like the 10-yard line. And so Lee is inclined to say, well, let's push one more time, and we could be into the end zone. Maybe that's a different kind of metaphor, but what the students have been thinking about is standing here and looking at it and seeing it the way it looked 150 years ago. What do you think?
Well, his name is Orrin Randolph Smith.
Could you imagine
That's 1929
running across this field? Also, they wouldn't be running. We saw the rifles themselves weighed about 12 pounds. They would have had their packs carrying food, equipment, clothing, blankets, ammunition, and the battle took place from July 1st to July 3rd. It was about 87 degrees on that day. So they did not run across the field. Nor did they order the charge, where you affix bayonets, that's for close fighting, and run a mile. Right? This was really a slow, orderly march, just you know, pacing across in daylight. So again, was Lee?
Even with their rifles not being as accurate as they were, putting yourself in an open position tactically is just a bad idea.
Well, if you think about it this way, if you have 14,000 soldiers, which is the number of soldiers they commit to this battle on the third day, wouldn't you kind of need an open area to
engage effectively.
to engage them? They come out of the woods. If our cameraman could get the woods back there. So he's got 14,000 soldiers, and they would obviously be lining up for miles behind that. And you have to bring them out of the woods. Armies like this in the 19th century, they fought in formation. And battles would often, from the days of the Romans and the Greeks, they would often fight on big open fields so they could maneuver, right? So, and they would come marching, you know, in columns, one at a time. So you look perhaps for an open field. After Gettysburg, the Civil War isn't over. This is a defeat for the Union Army. The war will go on for 2 more years. And some of those battles that we talk about in class called the Battle of the Wilderness, where often they would fight in enclosed wooded areas. And that was very difficult when there are a lot of trees and things for your armies to fight and to see any distance. So he knew it would be costly, right? But he thought he outnumbered the Union Army, which he didn't. Today we know that the Union soldiers had about 90,000 soldiers here, and Lee had about 75,000. But even that balance of power changes over time. On the first day, Lee's army greatly outnumbers the Union Army. But time is important in battles. Each hour that Lee does an attack allows for more Union soldiers to get here from New York, from Maryland, from New Jersey, from other parts of Pennsylvania. They're pouring in. So each day his army gets larger and larger and larger. By the third day he has 90,000. So he could have done the same tactics on the first day and it might have succeeded. Right? Now you do it on the third day and they're much stronger. So time, you know, is a factor in battle, as well as weather, as well as the experience of the soldiers. What other questions do we have?
You know, a lot of people damn Lee for what he did, but I don't think it's the worst idea in the world, because I mean, it's completely unexpected. And if you look at the map, it's a very difficult ridge to take, and doing something completely unexpected might have been how to take the ridge. That might have been what he needed.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Part of Lee's thinking might have been overconfidence. Right. Lee had faced larger armies before. He had been in equally difficult positions at the Battle of Chancellorsville, at the Battle of Fredericksburg, even in Antietam, which was a loss, but he managed to extract his army intact from Maryland. So Lee looked at it. Well, we've been in other difficult positions before. After the battle, Lee would say that he was surprised at how well the Union soldiers fought here. Because in other engagements, he says, once we commit and we start to press them, the Union soldiers will retreat. They'll break. Right? Why don't they retreat or break here? By the way, the monument behind you that I started with, the North Carolina monument, the nickname for North Carolina soldiers, which is kind of stuck even to this day for North Carolina, is Tar Heels. The North Carolina Tar Heels. And the North Carolinians say the reason they got that name is in tough battles, when other regiments would retreat, the North Carolinians would stick and stay. Like their heels were in tar, so they're called the Tar Heels, because North Carolinians don't back up. They don't retreat. Right? Stonewall Jackson gets his name, who's killed in Chancellorsville, so he's not here. But Stonewall Jackson gets the nickname at the first Battle of Bull Run, that he stands there like a stone wall. Well, on this day, the Union soldiers are standing, holding that position like a stone wall. And wave after wave of Confederate soldiers try to cross this field, and they do not retreat. They actually get up to the wall. A few get over the wall, and there's a bit of hand-to-hand fighting. This is when they will put their bayonets on, when it's close up fighting. But Lee said that here the Union soldiers really stood and fought. And what I want you to consider is, did they fight differently because now they're fighting in Pennsylvania? It's the Philadelphia regiment that's holding that position. They are from Pennsylvania, and now you're fighting on their home ground, right? General Meade is also from Pennsylvania, right? Do you think they fought differently in Pennsylvania than they did in Virginia?
Possibly.
Why would they fight? Why would they fight differently? And so the same thing for Confederate soldiers when we're invading the South. They fight harder when you're invading. And so here, the people from Pennsylvania are not going to surrender Pennsylvania or their home. They're going to fight to the last. And so they held and they stuck. And Lee didn't expect that. He expected, yes, but once we start hitting them and we start pounding them, they will retreat, and then we'll take the ground. Lastly, if Cameron can zoom in to the lines where the cannons were placed.
About the Battle of Atlanta.
So this is an open field. You have about 9,000 Union soldiers on the other side, with behind fences. Some of these wooden fences, which creates a kind of human barrier for the soldiers to climb over, right?
Kind of creating a bottleneck, sort of.
In addition to that, what other obstacles are going to be created?
Dead bodies.
Dead bodies. You're stepping over bodies, right? One soldier said, 30 minutes into the battle, that you were literally stepping from one body to the next of the people who had already been mowed down before you. Then they would call up another regiment, and then they would go. They would call up another regiment, right? And they would go. But in the meantime, all the dead bodies would still be lying over there. The amount of smoke from these cannons, so about 150 Confederate cannons, about 100 Union cannons, created so much smoke that they could no longer even see the positions that they were firing on. Right? It is believed that the Confederate cannon fire was inaccurate because of the fuses that they were using, so the timing, and then also as they fire them, the recoil causes the wheels to dig in, and then that changes the angle. And as they dig in, as you fire, the repercussion, if you don't adjust that, then you're overshooting your target. And what they wanted to hit were the Union soldiers in the defensive lines, to weaken them and kill them, and also to hit the enemy's artillery and take out their artillery. The Union artillery positions expected an attack. So for 2 hours, the attack started at 1 o'clock. They exchanged artillery fire until the Confederates were almost out of artillery. So then they stop, and then the infantry comes up and they start marching. But the Union side, they stopped, but they weren't out of artillery. They were waiting for the soldiers to come. So they pulled their cannons back so they wouldn't be hit in the assault, waited for the march to start about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, put them back in place. And that was deadly for the Confederate side crossing. When we were inside the museum in the visitor center, we saw these cannonballs, these big lead balls. What the Union side had done is switch from shooting lead to shooting canisters. These were cylinders, and instead of one big piece of lead inside, there were round projectiles, like ball bearings, we would call them today, and packed in sawdust. And so they would pack that in there, put that in the cannon. Then when you explode that, with 2 pounds of explosive, it was more like a shotgun.
Right.
So instead of one huge projectile coming out, you have dozens of these balls basically spreading a wider angle. At about 300 yards, a ball like that could cut a person in half. At 200 yards, people said a ball could go through 3 people before it would stop. So it hit the first person, go through him, hit the person behind him, go through him, and wouldn't stop until it hit the third or fourth person. That's how much velocity it had when you shoot one of those out of a cannon. Right, so this creates the kind of carnage that just wipes out and mows so many of the soldiers. When they get bogged down and went with this at the road, you can see where cars are passing. That road was there at the time. They got about that far. Also, the Union soldiers, much like the American Revolution, said, "Don't shoot until they reach the road." So the Springfield rifles that they had, they're accurate at about 300 yards. So said, don't shoot until they get at least 300 yards.
Right.
Then open fire. Right? And so when they get bogged down there, General Armitage, and these are what some of the monuments, people ask what are the monuments, you'll see one down in there, General Armitage, who tries to motivate his men to keep charging and keep going. Over 10 generals were killed at Gettysburg. Right, so 50,000 casualties, but as we were saying over lunch, the generals in the Civil War, they didn't stay in the back and just give orders. Right? They often came up front, and to motivate his men, he took off his hat and put it on his sword. We saw the swords, only officers carried the swords, and held it up, which made him a target. I mean, you're already wearing the general's uniform, right? And then he puts it on his sword, and he says, "Charge, follow me," and he leads them right up to the front lines, and then he's killed right there. So that becomes one of the heroic charges or moves of this engagement. The whole thing, believe it or not, only takes about an hour, and it ends in a defeat. I guess the question will end with this battle right here. Is the next day there's a light rain on July 4th, and Meade is not sure if Lee is going to attack again. Is he going to counterattack after the third day, make another attempt on the fourth day? And the fourth day comes and nothing happens. And then their scouts tell them that the Confederate Army is starting to retreat back to Virginia. Right? And Meade begins a kind of slow pursuit, but doesn't seem really anxious to try to catch or engage Lee. So what do you think about that? We count Gettysburg as being a tremendous victory for the Union. Abraham Lincoln regretted the fact that the war didn't end here in 1863, but instead, as we know, we'll go on for another 2 years. So as our exit question, could General Meade had ended the war here? Lewis.
Quite possibly. He had the advantage. His soldiers, I'm sure, were in good spirits after holding. Mm-hmm. But it also speaks to the psyche that you mentioned earlier, where if he felt like he had already protected his home, mm-hmm. All right, my home is good, just go on back to Virginia. A number of other facets in place, like you mentioned as well, where Meade was a student of Lee. So that holding your teacher in high esteem. I'm still the student, he's still the teacher. I don't know what he could be thinking, and that can kind of psych you out like in a boxing match, like you were saying.
So you think Meade was afraid to now go after him?
Oh yeah, because Lee, he's known for being the slipperiest general of them all. This could be a trap. This could be anything, mm-hmm. and you'll see that a lot in Union generals just afraid to follow up the attack on Lee, because he's just known as the precocious general. So
in the evening of the 3rd, Meade is happy that we didn't lose. we held them back. And we didn't lose. We think of it as this is a slam dunk, this is easy. After this, you should just go after him. It's like, no. Lee is clever. They might still come after us again on the 4th day. right?
Right.
And so when he sees Lee pulling back, he takes that as a good sign, right? Lee also doesn't know how the country, the Confederacy, is going to react to this decision, right? This was a gamble on his part that did not pay off. He offers to resign, and Jefferson Davis turns down his resignation, and most of the blame falls on Pickett, General Pickett. Right? And we call it Pickett's charge, not Lee's charge. It's Lee's idea to fight at Gettysburg. It's Lee's idea to attack here at this spot. And so General Pickett is obeying orders, right?
Typical propaganda.
Under objection. But as we just said, Lee has this aura and this reputation that the infallible Lee, if the battle didn't work, it must have been his generals who didn't perform well. But there's no way that it was Lee's fault. And so history blames Pickett for the defeat here at Gettysburg. Okay, we'll move on to some more sites. And any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay.
The Union had superior artillery, as you
Right.
mentioned. They had the advantage. The Confederacy actually knew about the fences in the foreground, in the background, just before they got there.
Right.
And still, from killed, wounded, and captured, percentage-wise, it's practically a draw. So why does history show this as a Union victory?
Right, good question. The two ways of determining victories in military strategy. The army that leaves the field is the loser. Right? So if you surrender the field to the enemy, then they won. As if you were fighting for this ground.
Okay.
Usually in military engagements, you have strategic objectives. You're trying to capture a bridge, a road, a city, a town, a factory. So if you're actually fighting for control of this land, right, this land is left in the hands of the Union Army. Right, so they won it. Although, as we said, Gettysburg really played no strategic importance in the war. Right? But that's the rules of determining who lost and who won. The other thing is we see that numbers are always determinative because although you have 90,000 Union forces, behind that ridge there are only 9,000 in this location. Right. So your battle lines extend all the way down to the little round top.
Right.
And so the other soldiers are dispersed in different positions. You have an attacking Confederate army of 12,000 against 9,000. So if you just looked at it numerically,
Right.
the Confederates should have won.
They had the advantage.
So why don't they win? General Aaron? If they have 12,000 Confederate soldiers against 9,000 Union soldiers, you would think the Confederates should have won this battle. Why don't they win? Even though they have superior numbers. They have inferior position.
That's
Right?
it.
I'd rather be in a defensive position there than to be
And
12,000 and have to go out over the open. Because as they try to cross this field, the numbers quickly drop from 12,000, 6,000 are killed right here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you might start out with 12,000, but if you have to walk across this field, not many of those 12,000 are going to make it. Whereas they start with 9,000 and suffer fewer casualties because they're in defensive positions.
Right.
The other thing that we'll see is for most of the war, and then even after Gettysburg, the rest of the war is fought in the South. Lee never invades the North again. So the only two major battles fought in the North, Antietam and Gettysburg. And both of those are failures. But in most of the other engagements of the war, it is the Confederate side who has the advantage of either having the high ground or the defensive position, and it's the Union side that has to do the attacking. And so in many battles, we have to cross the open fields. We have to go up the mountains. We have to do these suicide runs. Since you mentioned that, there are no black soldiers or black regiments at Gettysburg. And at first I thought that was curious because, as we said, this is July of 1863. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863, and they began recruiting black soldiers, but they're not put into action yet, at least not in this particular location. But one of the big battles that they do fight, the Massachusetts 54th, is at Fort Wagner, which is a fortress, right? And it is built as a fortress. And in that battle, the Union soldiers have to cross wide open beach So there's no trees. This is a beach, right? You have high tide, and they have cannons on walls in a fortress, and that is a suicide run. And they make that attack and fail to capture Fort Wagner. The movie Glory is about that kind of attack. So there are several battles like this in the American Civil War, and we could appreciate both the carnage and the courage of the soldiers who took part in it.
Question: do you think that this charge would have been better taking place at night?
Very few night battles in the Civil War. Armies generally did not fight at night for two reasons. One is hard to maneuver, and the dangers of friendly fire, right? Of soldiers getting entangled, and the ability to maneuver.
No night goggles.
Yeah, so no night goggles and things like that.
But no artillery.
So they generally did not fight at night. That would have been an audacious, strategy to try to maybe do it at night. Although they would still fire, so they would still.
Yeah.
Even with the smoke, they often didn't see exactly what you were shooting at,
Right.
but you fired in the general direction.
Right.
And the opposing army would be in tight ranks. So you don't necessarily shoot at a particular soldier, you shoot at the line approaching you, right? And unless they're very close. Great questions. Okay, well let's move to another spot on the field.